Warning, the following video contains spoilers for Morbius, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Venom Let There Be Carnage, Spider-Man Homecoming, Spider-Man Far From Home, Spider-Man No Way Home. If you don't want to get spoiled, I advise you to watch these movies first and then return back to get full context. Welcome to another episode of Jack Skyblue Reviews. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about the mid-credits scene from Morbius, and how it actually does make sense. At least much more than what most people think. Before that, however, let me just give you my quick thoughts on the film itself. I really enjoyed it. It does have its fair share of problems, even within the mid-credits scene that I'll plan to defend, as well as having some pacing issues very likely contributed to the executive meddling. But I still enjoyed it for what it was, thanks to the great acting, decent horror scenarios, and some real cool action scenes. All in all, a movie I would definitely like to watch again once it hits home release. Besides, it's still better than Venom Let There Be Carnage, because that movie was such a huge mess, which is funny because it has some of the most bloodless violence ever put in a PG-13 movie. With that out of the way, it's time to talk about the mid-credits scene that everyone apparently seems to hate. The scene opens at night, where a huge rift surrounds the dark sky. For those confused, there was a movie called Spider-Man No Way Home that came out before this one, where a magic spell that Dr. Strange messed up would cause the universe to go completely out of control, with Spider-Man villains from other universes suddenly appearing in the MCU. This scene in Morbius is connected to the climax of No Way Home. It then cuts to a prison cell, where suddenly we get to meet Adrian Toomes, aka the Vulture, once again played by Michael Keaton, who was the main antagonist in Spider-Man Homecoming, yet another MCU movie, who then finds himself in Sony's Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is where most people complained that Toomes shouldn't have been transported to the SMCU, due to Doctor Strange's spell undoing the rift of the multiverse, where only the characters that weren't part of the MCU were transported back to their universes, and Toomes originated from the MCU. This is where I come in to defend the scene, because, first of all, the rift didn't close. It was still open when Toomes was teleported away. Why do I mention this? Easy, because it means that he was teleported to the SMCU before Strange undid the spell. To further prove my point home, the rift didn't close unlike what happened at the end of No Way Home. To the contrary, it actually opened. So factually speaking, he was teleported to the SMCU before the spell was undone. So why would he be teleported to the SMCU then? Well, this leads me to my second point, which I will admit is more speculative, but not entirely implausible. Maybe, just maybe, the botched spell that caused all the chaos during No Way Home didn't just teleport Spider-Man villains from other universes to the MCU. What if the spell also had another side effect, where some Spider-Man villains that were a part of the MCU also got teleported to these other universes as well? It's never explored in No Way Home, but who says this couldn't be possible? I might as well say that it's entirely plausible. So why do I mention this? Easy, because that means that he was teleported to the SMCU before Strange made the whole universe forget about Peter Parker. A few seconds after being teleported to the SMCU, Toomes then remarks that he hopes that the food would be better in this prison. For some time, I did agree with people that this felt like a heavy underreaction for something that Toomes should be more concerned about. However, there actually is a simple reason that could explain why his reaction ended up being so, shall we call it, snarkily calm. Spider-Man, as well as the multiverse chaos, were all over the news, and it would be more surprising if he didn't hear about what was going on at that point of time. Now, the other point I used to think was weird at first had yet again to do with his underreaction. And that's the fact that he should have been more concerned, considering that he's not with his wife and daughter anymore. And regarding that, this one is a bit harder to defend, because I won't pretend like this point isn't worthy of criticism, but here is what I have to say. Ever since the end of Spider-Man Homecoming, where Adrian Toomes was exposed for his crimes, his wife and daughter, who were forced to move out of New York, possibly didn't want to have anything to do with him anymore, considering how shocking must have been to learn about how their husband/father you thought you knew your entire life would turn out to be a criminal. They might have visited him once in a while, but it's safe to assume it didn't end up being a nice family reunion. And it might have led to a nasty fight, which in turn added a more cynical life view to the already cynical Adrian Toomes, hence why he could only snark about the odd predicament he found himself in. That being said, I'm not saying that his tainted relationship with his wife and daughter was the reason for his stoic reaction, because for all we know, the writers or producers also possibly forgot that Adrian Toomes had a wife and daughter. So, as mentioned before, this is more speculative than the previous point I've made. The scene then cuts to a news report about the mysterious appearance of Adrian Toomes, who, as we now learn, doesn't have an alternate self in the SMCU. And due to the fact that he doesn't have a criminal record in this universe, he's allowed to be released from prison. Cut to the next scene, where we see Morbius driving his car somewhere in the middle of nowhere. There, he gets to meet Adrian Toomes, now wearing his Vulture suit. This is something I will admit I can hardly defend, but I'll try my best. Now, the easiest criticism that I want to bring up is that people pointed out that Adrian Toomes shouldn't be able to meet Morbius with his Vulture gadget just a couple of days after being released from prison. However, the thing is, it's never established that the scene is set a few days after Toomes got off free. For all we know, this could be set a few weeks or even a few months after he got to fly high into the future. Why you think that this is set only a few days after he was released is something you cannot confirm, and it wasn't established in the scene itself either. The second criticism is a bit tougher. Toomes talks about how he thinks that Spider-Man might have something to do with him landing in this new universe. People pointed out that he shouldn't remember Peter Parker after he got transported, but I once again like to remind you that he got transported before the spell undid the multiversal chaos in No Way Home, so Toomes still got his memory of Spider-Man and Peter Parker's identity intact. So this raises the question, what good is him keeping his memory of Peter Parker if the Peter Parker he knows isn't part of this universe? Easy. There's another Peter Parker who's part of this universe, and Toomes now got an easier fighting chance because of that. Who's this universe's Peter Parker? We don't know yet. Another critical point that I would like to bring up is how Adrian Toomes got his hands on a Vulture outfit, period. Because that's the most questionable part of the scene, and honestly, there's hardly anything I can say to defend it. Director Daniel Espinosa claimed that the reason as to how Toomes managed to get a new Vulture suit in the first place was because he is, in his words, a quote-unquote resourceful guy. However, this answer is very vague, and honestly, I think there's another much easier explanation for this, aside from Adrian Toomes being quote-unquote resourceful. So here's how it goes. Chitauri technology does exist in this universe as well, because honestly, if alien creatures like symbiotes exist in the SMCU, then why the hell not? I don't think Disney would cry over witnessing the technology of an obscure alien race to be part of another universe as well.
The Chitauri, the suckiest army in the galaxy. Why don't you just blow up the mothership?
But this is as far as I'm willing to go if it comes to defending the scene, because, as mentioned before, it actually raises more questions the more you think about it than, let's just say, the teleportation scene, which is actually very easy to explain if you think about it more fourth-dimensionally.
Right, I have a real problem with that.
Toomes offers Morbius a chance to, quote-unquote, do some good. This raises an interesting question, whether or not he talks about genuine good deeds now that he's a free man, or if his interpretation of good has an entirely villainous reason behind it. Now, the last point I want to bring up is that people complained that this scene just quote-unquote ruined the potential setup of the mid-credits scene of Spider-Man Homecoming. Guys, I hate to break this to you, but Sony/Disney Marvel already ruined this setup back when Spider-Man's identity was revealed at the end of Far From Home. And if Toomes wasn't teleported out of the MCU, he would have forgotten about Peter's secret identity anyway because of Strange's spell making every living being of the MCU forget about Peter Parker's mere existence. So regardless on how you look at it, the story arc between Spider-Man and Toomes was already neglected long before they came up with the idea of this mid-credits scene. However, as said before, since Toomes was teleported to the SMCU before Strange's spell managed to wipe everyone's memory of Peter Parker, Toomes luckily got away before the spell would be in its full effect. Is it contrived that he, of all people, would be teleported into this universe? Yes. However, if we want to talk about how contrived and contradictory the whole spell is, well, No Way Home wasn't very consistent with the rule of the spell either because, according to Doctor Strange, every villain who ever knew about Spider-Man's identity was teleported into the MCU. So what's the problem with what Doctor Strange said? TASM 2's Electro never got to learn about Spider-Man's identity in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. In fact, Electro only ever faced the unmasked Spider-Man of his universe at the very end of No Way Home. Oh, and don't even get me started how the inclusion of Sony's Eddie Brock doesn't add up to the spell either. So yeah, someone being teleported out of the MCU while others are being teleported into it doesn't sound as implausible as before now, does it? Now, with that being said, I still have to criticize Sony for something that is fully deserving of being criticized. Despite me mostly enjoying the mid-credits scene, it's very clear to state that these were all reshoots since Morbius was originally intended to be released before No Way Home, and they could have done a much better job handling the reshoots so that obscure internet critics like me don't have to make a full-on effort to defend what should be considered the greatest, jaw-dropping scene of the movie that, due to its rushed nature, ended up being the most infamously hated mid-credits scene this side of the live-action Gem and the Holograms movie. And don't even get me started with all the false advertising, with Sony going as far as using footage that was clearly only filmed for the trailers, as well as even stooping so low as using the screenshot of a freaking video game! Spider-Man for the PlayStation 4 to be exact. Why? Only to fool people into believing that Morbius would be set in the MCU, which, as we now know, has turned into a moot point, now that Spider-Man No Way Home has finally acknowledged the existence of the freaking multiverse. Well, that's all I have left to say about the mid-credits scene of Morbius. Despite some asinine decisions from Sony's side, and certain scenes that could have been handled better, I'm still very curious to see what all the upcoming SMCU movies will have in store. And until then, I hope that Sony will finally start listening to fans and actually let Tobey and Andrew have their own Spider-Man movies again. Or in Tobey's case, give him a proper send-off that his Peter Parker truly deserves. Oh, and one last thing. Vulture's suit in Morbius looks much cooler than it did in Homecoming. It puts more emphasis on the bird motif compared to Homecoming, where the suit looks nothing like a Vulture suit at all. Also, Keaton's Adrian Toomes is a much better villain than Gyllenhaal's Mysterio. Suck it, Far From Home.